Great.
Welcome, everyone. This is Adam Fishman. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Likud, and I want to welcome you all once again to our next in the series of AFL exclusive insider briefings. And today we have our new best friend, Amnon Lord, who is going to be introduced by Dr. Julio Messer, our board member in New York, and then we will get to his briefing and hopefully your questions. Julio?
Yeah. Shalom, Amnon. I'll make a brief introduction and then I'll give you the floor for 15 or 20 minutes or so. Amnon Lord was born in a kibbutz in the Galil. He wrote and anchored a TV series about the beginnings of Israeli cinema. He's the author of The Israeli Left, From Socialism to Nihilism, a political and historical analysis of the Israeli left from a personal perspective, published in 2003. As a journalist, he has written articles in several newspapers and currently writes in Israel Hayom. Mr. Lord, thank you very much for speaking to our group today.
Thank you, Julio. Shall I start?
Please.
Okay, I understand.
Yes, the floor is yours.
I understand that our listeners want to hear my view or my knowledge about the meeting between Prime Minister Bennett and President Biden. Mm-hmm. As far as I can tell from talking to people in the know and from the briefings in the press about what happened there, I believe that really the main goal for that meeting was to show to the American public and to the Israeli public a new national leader sitting and having a photo op with the US president. Unfortunately, it was in a very bad timing. The editor of Israel Hayom, Boaz Bismuth, actually warned Naftali Bennett about a few days before the meeting to leave it be now, not to go to Washington under the circumstances of the debacle in Afghanistan, because the disaster really took all the attention of the American establishment and certainly the aging president. Bennett and Biden talked about the Iran nuclear deal or the Iran nuclear development. This was the main issue. They talked a bit about the Palestinian issue, about some things that interest Israeli citizens, like doing away with American visas, stuff like this. Actually, it's not clear, I must say, because, you know, in order to understand this meeting, you have to go back and look at former meetings and also the former Israeli leadership. The former Israeli leadership was very strong and very able. Let's say the appointment of the former leadership were of course, Mr. Netanyahu and the head of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen, and the ambassador to Washington, Ron Dermer. They were extremely capable team. Also, there were very talented ministers in the cabinet, like Yuval Steinitz and various others. And they had definitely a strategy, let's say, coordinated very closely with the American president, the former President Trump. And they managed to, in a way, to push back on Iran's imperialistic encroachment on the Middle East, and especially to deter them from going forward in their nuclear development. I think in the past, when Netanyahu had a very clear vision, and he would place it in front of the American president without any hesitation, sometimes in a way that seemed confrontational, as we remember from 10 years ago and from 6 years ago. And this time, we saw a prime minister who, from the beginning, the main issue, the main target of the new government was to unseat the former leadership. You can't say that there is a clear strategy of Israel vis-a-vis Iran, except for going to the Americans to deliver the goods for us. At least, as strange as it might seem to American audience, or let's say conservative American audience, the Israeli security establishment, or most of it, strongly support going back to the nuclear deal, even if it gives the Iranians great economical advantages. And Bennett definitely is an ally of that establishment, which is represented by Defense Minister Benny Gantz, by the former head of the INSS. It's a security establishment in Tel Aviv University, General Amos Yadlin, and Ehud Barak. They're all in favor of returning to the deal in order to, let's say, to stop the Iranians from running in forward with going to the bomb. Now, okay, for the, let's say, for the press, for the public relations, the Israeli government is, of course, against the deal. But Bennett accepted Biden's saying, which is, for me, very diluted, that if the Americans cannot get back to the deal, which they seem to want to go back to at all cost almost, then we will look at other ways of dealing with nuclear Iran. I think this is not a very credible commitment. I think that even former President Obama was much clearer talking about having the military option on the table. He had a lot of pressure from Jewish groups, Jewish lobby, if we might use this expression. I think, as far as I can understand from what's going on in the States now, things change radically, and you cannot talk anymore about Jewish pressure on the American president. And then I would say also that if you look back at President Biden's record, he has his own reasons, I don't doubt it. But going back even to April 1975, I'm sure the audience understand what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the to the American debacle in Saigon. You know, it seems so far away, Saigon, Vietnam. Biden was already a senator by that time. And he told President Gerald Ford, some Israeli journalists, which I like a lot, mentioned it, and I didn't know this fact. In a meeting with Ford, Senator Biden was chilling. He said, we owe no moral obligation to even one Vietnamese, let alone 100,001 Vietnamese. We have to We should cut and run. Same thing going back to Syria. You remember the recurrence of chemical weapons attacks by President Bashar on his own citizens. People described Obama's attitude at that time as alienated and cold towards the suffering of Syrian citizens. But he drew so-called a red line that if Assad uses chemical weapons on his own citizens, America will act. They will not sit by and watch how thousands of men, women, and children suffocate under this kind of inhuman attack. The one person in his group of advisors or close circle, let's say, was his vice president, Joe Biden, who persistently told him, leave that red line, don't draw any red line. He warned him not to draw any red line on any subject, and not especially on the chemical weapon stuff. So that tells us, in the end, it was a great surprise. You know, the Churchill of that hour in August 30th, 2013, it's almost by the day, 8 years ago, the great hero, so-called, quotation marks, was John Kerry. Suddenly he was Churchill for one day. He gave a very tough speech. Everybody in the world thought that the next day we'll see an American action. Nothing happened because of various reasons. You know, the British Parliament denied the Prime Minister action. Then Obama kicked the ball to Congress, and he climbed down the ladder. No action after the red line, no red line. Actually, two people helped Obama save face. It was Yuval Steinitz, the cabinet minister, who used to be treasury minister and in the last few years, energy minister, and PM Netanyahu. They were able to bridge between Russia and America, and they suggested to Obama to deal with Putin, to arrange for the taking out all the chemical weapons of Syria outside of Syrian boundaries. And they did it. Of course, probably a lot of it was left inside Syria, but something happened. And it showed the idea came from Steinitz and Netanyahu. But I mentioned it because of Biden's position of no red lines. And I'm quite sure that at that time, the states at least had quite a big stick to wave, and it helped to carry out this kind of a deal. Now it doesn't have red lines about the nuclear weapons in Iran, and after Afghanistan, it doesn't have a big stick. So it's a very poor situation. And unfortunately, I see Israel, for some reason, trying to stick with the old strategy of keeping very close to the United States. Netanyahu already understood a few years ago that Israel should build, let's say, strategic independence. Of course, we trust that America is our closest friend, but I wouldn't say an ally anymore. I mean, we get the weapons deal, but this government for some reason, didn't realize the process that, as far as I understand, what the United States is undergoing in the last few years, it's unfortunate for Israel to stick with the United States as though the states will solve our main strategic problem confronting Iran, not only the nuclear development, but also its expansion in Syria, Yemen, the threats as we saw it in the Gulf and also against the Saudi oil facilities 3 years ago. And I think those kind of issues, at least I hope that Prime Minister Bennett managed to learn something, just by talking to President Biden, to understand what Israel can achieve with the United States and what it cannot expect from the United States. Let me mention that Netanyahu was reluctant to share intelligence with the CIA, and we learned that the Iranians actually folded all the CIA networks in Iran. I mean, if Israel shared information with the CIA agents in Iran, we would probably lose a lot of stuff ourselves. We would lose our assets inside Iran if we shared it. So we are in a unique situation now that we want to be very close to the United States, but unfortunately, I don't see the kind of security coordination that could result from it. Although probably this was what Bennett and Biden discussed, but as far as I know, the messages were very diluted. I return to the utterance of Biden that we will go and consider other means. It's not very clear. What else can we...
I can jump in with a question really quickly from Jacob Navon, and then let's turn it over to Giulio, who I know has a number of questions on this point. Jacob Navon is one of our President Club members in the States and asks that Bennett claimed he was presenting a new strategy on Iran. How likely is it that there is anything really new? And if so, how receptive do you think, based on what you've just said, the current administration would be to that presentation of a new strategy?
Actually, the other day, Yossi Cohen, the former head of Mossad, published an article in Yediot Achronot in which he used the term Israel should challenge the nuclear deal. Now, I'm not sure what he meant. In the former administration in Israel, you would probably think that maybe the way we treated the Natanz, or somebody treated Natanz 4 months ago, 5 months ago, maybe somebody else knows how to deal with Fordo, which is the main nuclear site now, or most of the centrifuges are there. So if Israel sticks with this kind of the same strategy as before, we might, that's one thing we don't know. Did we get a green light to do what we want, to act militarily? I actually don't think so. I think especially after Afghanistan, Biden, the United States, really don't want to get involved in any Middle Eastern war. So that means Israel will sit still.
Okay, before I ask my first question, I wanted to add something to what you said about intelligence sharing with the CIA. I just want to remind everybody that the current head of the CIA, William Burns, was the head of the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs in the State Department under Colin Powell for 4 years. He is the father of the roadmap and many other initiatives that
In 2004.
yeah.
Right.
So that's just the point that I wanted to make. My first question is, Tzachi Hanegbi stated in the plenum of the Knesset this week that the Prime Minister Bennett failed to stand up to pressure from Biden on the Iranian issue. What did he mean by that? And did he provide any evidence?
Well, I don't think there was pressure. I think there was initially low expectations. He didn't want to confront him. He knew that Biden really want to get back to the nuclear agreement, although there is growing assessment that the Iranians themselves don't want to get there. So I don't think there was pressure, because I think Bennett lowered expectations. I talked with one of the correspondents who were there. He said just the mere fact that he sat and with the American president and had some kind of respectable appearance and didn't stutter, this is considered an achievement. I don't feel that, I don't have any sense that he really challenged Biden. Maybe he didn't see any, I mean, if Israel challenged Biden, the prime minister wouldn't go to Washington at all. He would challenge the policy through actions, like we saw before in the last half year, or in the last 3 years, but especially in the last half year, we see also a pattern of what we call deridingly containment. There was an attack on a ship which is identified as Israeli, and 2 people were killed there. There was a Hezbollah missile attack. There were various challenges from Gaza. And we saw a government which is very reluctant to react militarily. So I don't see that this will be any different on the Iranian arena. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what Tzachi Hanegbi meant is that that Bennett was too shy, shall we say. He thought that it's enough that he is meeting Biden, but at least I'm sure it sealed pretty much probably good relationship and good coordination between the Israeli and American establishment.
Okay.
Security establishment.
Okay. Alan Kahani from Florida asks whether you have any indication that Bennett was able to secure from Biden the delivery of bunker-busting bombs to be potentially used against underground Iranian nuclear facilities.
Again, I try to understand I don't have indication, but I know that in the past already we got some, in the last few years, better equipment, better buster bombs. We know that Obama actually, under the pressure of the Israeli government, remember that Israel in the last 11 years, we exposed secret nuclear sites that that pressured America and the world to strengthen the sanctions. We went and prepared a military option of our own, and that we learned later in the last couple of years, there were publications about it, that the United States under Obama developed a certain kind of method with special bombs to destroy such sites as Fordo. I tend to believe, I don't have any indication what kind of stuff we have now, but the things that happened, you know, in the last, really in the last year, shows us that we have access to any place, anywhere inside Iran. Look at what happened to Fakhrizadeh, look what happened at Natanz and in various other sites. It shows that we have access, that we can do it. You know, the Fakhrizadeh operation was carried out by some device which weighed 1 ton. Some people brought inside Iran various stuff that was very heavy and did the thing. So if we could bring this kind of device inside Iran, we could bring it, something like this, or not we, whoever did it, to anywhere else. We could. So I think we have operational capability, and it's our own decision to do it or not to do it. Unfortunately, I feel that we become, that we are too considerate of American interests, which are not to do anything.
A question, if I could, from our national chairman, Ken Abramowitz, about the Israeli public's response or reaction or perception of the current government. He asks that Naftali Bennett criticized Netanyahu from the right, and now he is running a government from the left. The question is what is the perception of the Israeli public? What percentage of them do they view a Bennett government as illegitimate? How do they view it?
Actually, this is a great internal problem in Israel because, you know, we never had in our parliamentary system, as confused as it is, you always had to be close to winning an election. I mean, Netanyahu composed a government in 2009 when he was with 27 and Tzipi Livni had 28, but the coalition was strong enough and he was the biggest party in the coalition. Now you have number 6. I mean, 6 seats. It doesn't give him any public legitimacy, except that this government won the Knesset vote, so it's a legal government. But there is a big problem. It's you see a lot of activity from the leftist ministers. The only thing he can claim about the right is that it seems like the Palestinian political process or peace process is frozen, and nobody talks about evacuating settlements. But, you know, settlements were, if the court decides to evacuate something, it'll be evacuated. But there weren't evacuations in the last few years, and Netanyahu already got into the minds even of the international arena that Israel's security demands Israeli presence in the West Bank from the Jordan to the Green Line. But I think the combination is more a leftist, and you can see it also security-wise with Iran and the skirmishes on the borders, that the attitude of the military and the security establishment is very dovish, and Bennett has no clout about it.
Our board member, Sharon Tsur, asks from Michigan if you think that it was appropriate or counterproductive for Israelis in general and Likud MK Galit Atbarian in particular to mock President Biden for possibly falling asleep during Bennett's remarks.
I think it was done on the social media, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did she mention it on the Knesset podium?
No.
I think on the social media, it's. I didn't give it much thinking, but I can only say that if Netanyahu sat in front of him, he wouldn't fall asleep. Let me tell you this. He would be wide awake to see if he doesn't insert some kind of demand, some lecture maybe about old Israel versus the Roman Empire and stuff like this.
Our President Club member, Roberto Lipstein, wonders whether it was Bennett that was asleep when Gantz went to Ramallah.
First of all, I don't think it was a bad move. I mean, it's natural that an Israeli, no, I understand that Gantz wanted to do it and Bennett held him off for a couple of weeks until he finished his duty in Washington, his visit in Washington. And I think it's the right move for an Israeli leader to meet with the head of the Palestinian Authority, with, of course, with the knowledge that Abu Mazen now, Mahmoud Abbas, has no constitutional legitimacy for many years now. I mean, he's just there. He wanted to get some constitutional legitimacy by going to elections, if you remember, 4 months ago. Then he realized it wouldn't be very effective. He canceled it, and this was one of the triggers for Shomer Chomot operation. For the Hamas asserted itself through this small war over the Palestinian people, and worse than this, the Israeli Arabs. So I think, I'm not sure what Gantz achieved with meeting with Abu Mazen, maybe just managing, like I said in our newspaper, like they were meeting like two accountants. I'll take $500 million from this side, I'll move it to that side, something like this, to ensure that the Palestinian Authority can keep on going. It's a kleptocracy, you know.
On that topic, Enrique Reginski from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, would like to know if Israel received anything in return from Abu Mazen for the goodwill gestures brought by Gantz. And I would also ask, has the Palestinian Authority ever made any goodwill gesture toward Israelis?
I think there are gestures, but only on the ground. There are quite a few cases where Israelis, wanderers, lost their way, enter into an area in the West Bank. And if Palestinian security personnel didn't get them out of the street and return them to Israeli authorities, this would probably end up very badly. So I think these are small things of goodwill. I think in the last fire, who knows who lit it, but there were some Palestinian crews came from the Palestinian Authority to join with the Israeli crews to extinguish the great fire near Jerusalem. So I think I wouldn't, on that level, I won't lose hope. I mean, there are feeling of the possibility of cooperation. Really, in Israel, what worries many people, like myself, is the Israeli Arabs, and not least, it's completely absurd that representatives of, of many of the Arab Bedouin communities in the Negev, which confiscated the state land and terrorized various areas in the south. They're actually represented in this government by Iran, by Mansour Abbas. This is absurd to me. And it's really indeed very strange that what the political development in Israel that enabled, that defied the will of, let's say, the majority in creating a Zionist nationalist government. And instead you get a government which is multicultural, to say the least, if not anti-Zionist altogether.
President Jerry Platt asked the following. Several weeks ago, MK Rinawi Zoabi said that her party, Meretz, together with the Arab Ram Party, can prevent the government from taking military action. She further added that if Netanyahu had still been prime minister, Israel's reaction to Hezbollah rockets would have been stronger than it was under Prime Minister Bennett. What are your thoughts about this government's ability to react in the event of a military intervention?
I think this is one of the cases where I think Rinawi Zoabi is absolutely right. I mean, because especially if we know that I think since the end of 2018 and even before, Israel, now when we look back, Israel took quite risky actions in Lebanon. Again, these are some of the actions. We cannot say who did it, but somebody did it inside Beirut, and and the IDF was very on alert on the border when we expected reactions from Hezbollah, and we did very well. Hezbollah wasn't able to react effectively against very, let's say, daring operations that Israel did in Lebanon and definitely inside Syria. And I'm sure that this government will not be able to carry out such preventive military actions. All those actions are done in order to prevent the Hezbollah from being armed with precision-guided missiles. So I'm sure that the actions, the activities from the northern border is a result of the perception of the Arab factions everywhere that Israeli lost deterrence because of this strange government.
It's been reported that President Biden agreed to postpone the reopening of the Palestinian American consulate in Jerusalem until after Israel's budget is approved by the Knesset, no later than in early November. But apparently, Bennett failed to get an indefinite postponement, so much so that Foreign Minister Lapid declared yesterday or the day before that the reopening of the government would, quote, destabilize the government.
Yes, yes.
Do you think that Biden will demand that Bennett accept the reopening come November? Do you think Bennett will cave? And what will be the political consequences, if any?
I think that for the time being, not just for passing the budget, the Americans will not pressure this government in order to let it not just survive, but get into regular activities. And I think the strength of this government is its weakness, because the message to the Americans is, look, we hardly can survive in the political climate and the political situation in the Knesset. Don't pressure us. But I think as far as I understand the way of thinking of people like Rob Malley and other people like him around Blinken, I think their way of thinking is not along the old political process, the old peace process, but exactly doing things that will put Israel under pressure, will harm Israel diplomatically, like giving finance to UNRWA. And I think one of the main items on the line is opening the consulate. I think eventually they will insist on it. And since Bennett is constantly being pressured from the right about this consulate, it could be that he will have no choice but to dismantle or to leave this government once this kind of thing happens.
So sorry.
Okay.
I want before we end, I did want to ask, based off of what you're talking about now, with the strength of this current government, we are the American Friends of the Likud, and we're looking toward the future. How does the future look toward this government continuing? I've been told by those in the Likud that the passing of the budget, when it does happen, will be the wake-up call that the Likud voters need in order to ultimately perhaps move on to the next leader. We saw today Yuli Edelstein again talking about primaries for the leadership. Can you comment on that?
I think that, first of all, the main thing that the Likud should concentrate on is not, it should disregard this government and develop itself, develop the party, getting into action inside the party, convening convening the convention, bringing new life to the snifim, to the branches along in the country, to present the Israeli public with a real democratic vision of a national camp, and not. I think eventually the government will collapse, but I think my fear is that this is not a new government, but a new regime. It seems like even the Jewish sovereignty of the Israeli state is being diluted and disregarded, and it has a lot of strengths from from the Israeli ruling class. Let's face it. I mean, in the States, you're continually talking about the American ruling class. There is a ruling class in America, in Britain, in France. We never thought in Israel in this term, a ruling class. But now we realize that it's a very strong group inside the Israeli society, and it was able to bring about this kind of government with a prime minister who has only the support of a very small faction. It's hard to predict what will happen after the budget. Some people think that even Lapid might have an interest in dismantling this government. Maybe he would want to go to elections under some kind of a peace plan and to unite the entire left with him in a new election. Other people point to the fact that Lieberman was never a member of a coalition for more than a year and a half. So this gives you another indication of what might happen. It's hard to believe that this government will last 4 years.
Adam, do we have time for 2 more questions?
Let's put the 2 questions together and we'll wrap up.
Okay, one is a short one and the other one is a long one. So I'll bring them both together. On the visa waiver alleged concession from Biden, because it would require reciprocity, do you think Israel will be ready to allow any Arab American to automatically enter Israel? And the second question, which is a long one, but I think it's probably the most important one. Some people here in the US, myself included, believe that the Iranian regime has made a strategic decision that now is the time to break out to the bomb. The combination of Biden and Bennett is just too tempting. The moment of truth seems to be very close. Gantz himself declared that Iran is less than 2 months away from amassing enough enriched uranium for the bomb. Unless there are still some unknown covert measures to be taken, Bennett will be faced with one of 3 possible decisions. 1, to accept that Iran will be a nuclear power and shift to a policy of containment. 2, to order an attack on the main Iranian nuclear installations if he is willing to assume that huge responsibility and can get his coalition partners to support it. Or 3, as in 1967, invite the right-wing opposition to join the government and share the responsibility for the attack, perhaps with Bibi as defense minister. How well do you know Bennett, and what do you think he would do?
Ooh, that's a long one. First of all, I think if there is such a moment of truth, momento de verdad, there could be a move, like you mentioned, in the style of 1967. I believe that this is what Bennett might do. Go to the right, bring them into the government, and this would become really a new government. And this would be also an indication that Israel is going alone on like President Johnson said to Eshkol a couple of days before the war, if you go it alone, Israel will remain alone, and we will be ready to do it. Of course, I'm not sure. I think that this would be the best. Don't be surprised if there will be appeals to the Supreme Court that Netanyahu, under his indictment, cannot be a minister or prime minister in Israel. I mean, in Israel, the legal issues are more important than the nuclear issues. But I think a unity government in face of nuclear Iran is really the right thing to do. I don't feel from Biden's slip in front of the camera that Bennett and Biden feel that something is very close. I don't see that, I don't read in any publication in America, people talk about this kind of advancement. If they do, really Israel will have to decide if it goes for the attack.
So I want to thank you very much, Amnon. I want to thank you, Julio, and all of you who have joined us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time and for your insights and just the breadth of knowledge that you bring to us. So I want to thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all next time. Everyone should, like we said, if you're on the East Coast, stay dry. Everyone should stay healthy, stay safe, and Shana Tova U'Metuka to all.
Shana
Thank
Tova.
you, and
Thank you,
Shana
Amnon.
Tova for
Shana Tova.
inviting me.
Amen.